what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, April 2nd, 2018, Monday after the Easter holiday. I'm glad Easter is over. Between Easter and Palm Sunday, it's a huge workload for Claire's choirs, and now we're out of that. Anyway, start of a brand new week, start of a brand new month. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phones when you call on in. And yes, you've probably heard it by now, but after all the Sturm und Drang and what's going to happen, it turned out that the Chinese space station Tiangong-1 crashed back to Earth over in the South Pacific near Tahiti. And so completely harmless, no indication that any parts survived the reentry intact, let alone impacted anywhere. In fact, nobody seems to have been able to get a video of the reentry as well. So all over and done with, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. Bad day on the Dow. They're trying to shove it back up. The bell just closed. They were trying to shove it back up. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. Now, getting on to our domestic politics, there was an interesting article I came across, and it was over at MSN. And I normally don't hang out at MSN an awful lot because corporate media bias and everything. But there was an interesting article entitled, "Tired of the Wait Game, White House Stabilizers Gone, Trump Calling His Own Shots." And they basically go on to describe Trump having a meeting with Don King without the normal entourage around him. And MSN is portraying this as a bad thing, that all of a sudden Donald Trump is out there just doing what Trump wants, the way he did when he worked in the world of business. And it's like a bad thing. Well, those stabilizers, that's the deep state that's been controlling Trump. And it looks to me, if I read this correctly, Trump is starting to break free of that. And Trump may be going back to being the Donald Trump we all voted for. And that would be a really, really good thing. And we're starting to see some other indications as well. There's actually some good news in today's program here. It's not all bad. Now, former intelligence officer Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer is talking about Barack Obama's wiretapping on the Trump campaign, and he says it's not just a federal crime, but that the results of this investigation could result in Obama being brought up on felony charges. He would be the first president in history to be hit with a felony indictment. Of course, with our corrupt judicial system, it's never going to happen. If they weren't going to indict Hillary Clinton, they're certainly not going to indict Obama. But it's another indication of the extreme criminality that lurks at the very top of our political system. And Americans just need to understand that. They need to realize what's going on here. And somebody sent me this wonderful quote from Thomas Jefferson, and yes, I'd read it before. And Jefferson said, "Educate and inform the whole mass of the people. That is the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty." And that, of course, is what we're all about here at Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com. We're trying to educate the public to the reality of what life is like in the United States of America instead of that corporate media crafted illusion being fed at you from all those TV panels everywhere that you go. Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and they'd better wake up and realize it right now because we're in a crisis situation. Now, you remember the Awan brothers. There were these Pakistani IT aides who later turned out to have been making unauthorized access to congressional data on computers all over the Capitol building. And it is now turning out that every one of the 44 House Democrats who hired these Pakistan-born IT aides basically declared them exempt from background checks, according to congressional documents. And that includes Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, one of these Democrats said, "I want a background check on this guy before he's allowed to work on my computer." Now, something is definitely going on there. Somebody was running an intelligence network inside the Capitol building. Maybe the Democrats went along with this because these Pakistani IT aides were spying on the Republicans. And if it was a spy network, and it sure looks like one to me, was it working in parallel with, or was it connected to, the espionage operation that it appears Hillary Clinton was operating out of the Department of State, using her weak security private email server to deliver U.S. secrets to foreign interests, and using her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the money? There is a huge scandal lurking there in the background. If I could actually get to Washington, D.C., I'd start digging on some of that stuff. All right, so let's get into the war zones. A lot of stuff going on over there, a lot of interesting developments. The militants, the hired terrorists, the U.S. proxies, whatever you want to call them, have started their withdrawal from the key town of Douma. Now, the Syrian Arab Army has established full control over the southern part of the Damascus suburb of eastern Ghouta. It is now back in the hands of the legitimate Syrian government. And the Russian Center for Reconciliation of the Opposing Sides in Syria has revealed that a total of 41,000 militants and their family members had left the settlements of Irbil, Jobar, Ain Tamar, Zamalka. Meanwhile, 153,000 civilians have been evacuated since the start of the humanitarian pauses in the area. They've really just trashed the place. We're going to take a moment to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, last week we reported that even as we were hearing that the U.S. is building yet another illegal military base inside Syria, Donald Trump came on out and made a statement saying, we're getting out. We're getting out. And let other people take care of it. Very soon we're coming out. And apparently that was not just a misstatement. Trump is confirming plans to withdraw 2,000 U.S. troops and personnel, and presumably their equipment, from Syria. And on Friday, the president told senior White House aides that U.S. forces will be exiting Syria after public comments made earlier. Well, as you can imagine, the interventionists are just tearing their hair out. They're just screaming, hey, we took their oil. We've got to keep the oil. We went through all that work to conquer that place. We've got to stay there. So over the weekend, the editorials and the cable news, the prostitutes and the correspondents were just screaming in disbelief and horror and accusing the Trump White House of chaos over the Syria policy and insisting ISIS will come back if America leaves. Well, only if America starts signing those paychecks again. Now, during the campaign in 2016, Trump himself stated in speeches that U.S. support to jihadists in Syria under President Obama is what fueled the rise of ISIS in the first place, and he's absolutely right. So maybe Trump is starting to become Trump. Maybe we've had a year of Trump trying to fit in with the political system and just becoming so disgusted with it that he's just not going to bother anymore. There are other indications as well. Now, if the U.S. does stay in Syria, there's an interesting little article coming out of Eurasia Future, basically saying that the United States faces a Viet Cong-style genuine Arab rebellion in Syria. I'm hearing my own feed coming back to me. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, Mike, I'm hearing my own feed coming back to me with a second delay. Okay, it's fixed. Now then, so according to this article, if the United States remains in Syria, it faces a Viet Cong-style Arab revolution or rebellion. Now, everybody's been playing loosey-goosey with the name rebel, trying to imply that opposition to Assad was a grassroots affair with the general population of Syria. It isn't. Rebel was a label that was plastered over these highly paid U.S. mercenaries and proxy forces to make it look like this is Syria's internal business, and the U.S. was just there to help. But this article is saying that if the U.S. remains in there, there could be a genuine grassroots rebellion against the American forces, much as what happened in Vietnam with the Viet Cong. And the United States didn't do too well with that one here. Article coming out of Activist Post, a document has surfaced, a CIA document from all the way back in 1986, talking about how to bring about regime change in Syria. And apparently this document was an update on one that appeared in 1983. So they've been planning this for a very, very, very long time. Okay, I'm being told that the YouTube link is not working, which is annoying as all heck. We seem to have nothing, but let's see. Take a quick look. Yeah, YouTube has got a problem. Or I'm being censored and they don't want to admit that's what's going on. Getting back over to Great Britain and Russia. Russia is now claiming that the Skripal poisoning was staged by British intelligence. And apparently in an interview on Russia's NTV channel, a gentleman named Yakovenko is saying, we have had very serious suspicion this provocation was done by British intelligence. Now, what Russia is doing is they're changing the game on Great Britain. Theresa May came on out and said, we think you did it. It's up to you to prove that you're innocent. Return to Code Napoleon. And she's drawn a lot of criticism from other nations around the world saying, you show us your proof that Russia did it. And now Russia's coming back and giving Great Britain a taste of their own medicine. We think British intelligence did it. You prove that you're innocent. Now, Yakovenko is suggesting London gained several benefits from the poisoning, both short and long term, in that Theresa May's government is capitalizing on the event to boost support at home, while burying headlines over its failures to negotiate better Brexit terms. The long-term benefits is that London is able to elevate itself into a primary position in the ongoing confrontation between the West and Russia. That may come back to bite them. But the little oddity about the Skripal case, Britain's latest claim is that the Novichok was smeared on the doorknob of the Skripal home. And there are two problems with that. First of all, that means that whatever hit them took 7 hours to take effect. And Novichok works much more quickly than that. You start to feel it within seconds. But the Skripals left their home, touching that doorknob, and they went on out. They had a lunch. They did a bunch of errands. And only after that did they become sick. Plus, of course, the daughter, Yulia, is awake and talking. And she touched exactly the same doorknob that Sergei did. So there's something not really working there. Possibly as part of an escalation of the diplomatic deterioration, Russia has shut down an undercover MI6 operation in Moscow. Apparently there was this NGO, the British Council in Russia, and apparently it was being used as a cover for MI6 operating inside Moscow, inside Russia. And the Foreign Intelligence Service basically said, they're out, we're kicking them out. Which means apparently they were aware that MI6 was there all along. Now, an article over in the Express, British Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson is out there saying, Putin's World War threats are real. And this is a direct quote from this guy. Vladimir Putin might trigger World War III if he continues trying to subvert, undermine, and influence countries around the world. Now, you want to talk about a big, steaming pile of bovine excrement. It's the U.S. that is subverting, undermining, and influencing countries around the world. This is called projection of your own sins onto another party. Or maybe Gavin's argument is, you know, you're not allowed to, that's our job to do that to the rest of the world. You're cutting in on our action. Now, there is a surprising development here. Apparently on his March 20th phone call, where Donald Trump congratulated Putin on winning the Russian presidential election, which got everybody's knickers in a twist. How could you even talk to him? Apparently, Trump invited Putin to a high-level summit at the White House. And apparently it's going to happen. They haven't picked a date, but that's a very positive sign that maybe Trump and Putin can tamp down all this war nonsense that's going on here. Meanwhile, article coming out of Al Jazeera, U.S. and Germany want to rebuild trust with Russia. And the article says the United States and Germany have signaled their intention to gradually improve ties with Russia after they were strained by the nerve agent attack on a former spy in England. So all of a sudden, it looks like this agenda for confrontation with Russia, at least as far as Putin and Trump is concerned, and Merkel, they're backing off. Now, that doesn't preclude one of the war hawks staging their own false flag to get the war going. Do you remember when Francis Gary Power was in the U-2 shot down over the Soviet Union? And it gave the hardliners an excuse to demand that Khrushchev not meet with Kennedy. And there were rumors circulating after that Francis Gary Power's U-2 had been sabotaged so that it would come down over Russia so that the hardliners could say, see, you cannot trust the American people. That kind of thing does go on. Remember when Jimmy Carter was trying to rescue the Iranian hostages? And all of a sudden they had all those problems with the helicopters where they couldn't even get close to Tehran. Because Reagan wanted to use the hostages as a campaign issue. This sort of thing does happen. Let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Putin shouldn't come to the United States, Mike. It's got to be either Sochi or he should go to Germany because it's just egging on Russia all the time. And by Putin going to Washington, I don't know. It's just, to me as a Ukrainian, I think it should be either Sochi or in Germany. Germany would most likely probably be where Angela Merkel hosting this, whatever it's going to be, this gathering, you know. Because going to Washington, I don't know, it just looks like he's kowtowing to Washington. And, you know, like with all this stuff with Russia did this, Russia did that, I think it's got to be like a neutral, slightly neutral country. You know what I mean?
With you. Like, I agree with you. If Putin goes to the White House, Trump's got the home court advantage. I think they should meet someplace like either Iceland or Finland, someplace like that. But this is just the word that's coming on out, is that Trump extended the invitation. Putin has at least tentatively accepted. They just have not set a date. Now, of course, Putin could come on back and say, I don't really want to have to fly halfway around the entire world. Can we meet someplace in the middle? Let's meet in Great Britain because I love fish and chips.
That could be, but I still think Germany would be a great place to land just because Angela Merkel would be hosting the event. And, you know, she, with Nord Stream 2 being authorized, but yet, you know, they kicked out, the 4 ambassadors, so they're kind of playing both sides, you know. So I think Germany would be a good spot. And hey, Mike, what do you make about this another test? I mean, you know, Putin saying, you know, he said it at the State of the Union address, you know, listen to us now, please. They did another test of this anti-ballistic missile test, which is not the SARMAT, it's another test. He's trying to tell us, stop pushing us. This is what he's telling us, Mike, and nobody's reporting on it, Mike. Like, it's just only in the East, you know, it's not in the West. And it's a warning, all these tests, you know. And it's scaring the hell out of me because this is 1914 Sarajevo we're at, Mike. I see a lot of people saying that, and it is. You know, people don't realize what's going on because they're being, you know, told about other crap on TV or the news, but we're at a pivoting point. Our stock market's down. It's just we're at a very scary point in history, and it just somebody makes one mistake and we're off to the races.
You're absolutely right.
Can you hold me over?
Yeah. Okay, Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is saying that he is expecting that there will be war with Iran within 10 years. I think he's being very, very generous, and maybe he's just trying to get Iran to relax and say that war is not imminent. I think it's the other way around. I'm very concerned that Trump's backing off of Syria and North Korea is because Benjamin Netanyahu, during the AIPAC conference in Washington, D.C., sent him a message: you get Iran now. And we know Israel wants Iran smashed up, just the way Baghdad, or rather Iraq, got smashed up. So I don't think it'll be 10 years, not even close here. Now, as you know, Friday, there was this horrific incident in Israel down on the border with Gaza, where these thousands of Palestinians were marching for their right of return. Now, you need to go back and understand that when the United Nations created the state of Israel, it granted Palestinians a right to return to their homes and villages taken from them during the creation of Israel. And the idea was that Israel would build itself up around those already existing Palestinian villages. Of course, Israel's never complied with that. So every year, the Palestinians celebrate Land Day, where they're calling attention to the fact that Israel is still occupying land that does belong to them, because Israel's never compensated any of the Palestinians for the land that was stolen. So there was this demonstration, and we had mentioned before it even started, Israel was sending snipers down to that border fence. And apparently they opened fire with live ammunition. So far, 18 dead, somewhere around 1,000 injured. And some of those are probably going to die because the Gaza hospitals have already started running out of basic supplies like blood, bandages, disinfectants, and so forth. Now, a lot of countries around the world have come on down and said, this is definitely excessive force. Israel is saying, oh, no, 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 the Palestinians deserved it. They were rioting. They were rioting everywhere. Well, none of the photos and videos that have come on out from this are showing anything but the Israelis attacking and the Palestinians running. In fact, there's one video clearly showing a protester being shot in the back while he's running away. Apparently, a 12-year-old Palestinian boy was shot in the leg, shattering the bone. You got to be a real manly man to shoot a kid in the leg, as Ron Whitewood said. And I want to draw a parallel between what happened in the Passover Massacre, which is what everybody's calling it, and another massacre that took place on April 13th, 1919 in India, called the Amritsar Massacre. And that's when British forces who were occupying India fired into a crowd of protesters, killing hundreds and injuring many more. And it caused a huge stink. It shifted the world's sympathy away from Britain and toward the people of India. And many historians view the Amritsar Massacre as the pivotal moment in the decline of British rule in India. And maybe this is what's going to happen with Palestine. Because despite all the corporate media propaganda and all of the U.S. interference in the Security Council to protect Israel, the rest of the world sees clearly what's going on. Who is the oppressor? Who is the oppressed? Who are the violators of human rights? And they're just getting tired of being forced to stand there and not do something about all this injustice. Now, speaking of the corporate media, over at the New York Slimes, and by the way, there's virtually no coverage of this in the American corporate media, but there was this one article in the New York Slimes basically saying the Israel line. Oh, the protesters were rioting. The Israelis had no choice but to start shooting into the crowds, which is probably one of the reasons why the readership for the New York Slimes is not doing all that well. And of course, there was an emergency resolution introduced at the UN Security Council to call for an open, transparent investigation as to just what happened. And of course, the United Nations vetoed it. So there will be no investigation. Just listen to what Israel says and believe it, and everything will be fine. Don't dare listen to any other points of view. Don't investigate. Don't think for yourself. If you think for yourself, you're a Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Well, this Passover massacre has fueled friction. Erdogan is calling Netanyahu a terrorist and Israel a terrorist state. I don't think he's far off on that. Netanyahu, rented lips, Netanyahu fired back saying Turkey is in no position to lecture because Israel has the world's most moral army. And after all, Turkey is bombing the Kurds. So that's going on. Story coming out of lowblog.com. Netanyahu is saying, and he said it privately, finally said it publicly, even if there is peace between Israel and Palestine, the occupation will never end. It will just go on forever, like Israel is doing in the Golan Heights. Theirs in all but name. Although it may be that Assad, now that he's finally gotten rid of the U.S.-sponsored terrorists, may decide he wants that Golan back, because there's a lot of oil and gas under there. And he's not happy that Israel is selling what is basically Syrian property. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, let's get on back here to Nicolas Sarkozy, former president of the French Republic. And it's an interesting story about how your fortunes can change just very, very quickly. Back in 2007, apparently he was being financially assisted by Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. And that was all done very much under the table. Then Sarkozy betrayed Gaddafi and got on board with the people who went into Libya to basically smash that golden R and kill Gaddafi. Total betrayal of the relationship there. Well, Sarkozy is now in trouble because he has been accused of attempting to suborn the senior judge who was heading the investigation into that 2007 presidential campaign. And so he's been charged with corruption and influence. So his political career looks to be pretty much over at this point. Now, we've been talking about our military. We're talking about the high cost of the military. Last week we were talking about how, due to the high cost of maintenance and upgrades, the Air Force may only be able to buy 2/3 of the F-35s they originally wanted. We're hearing that from other countries as well. Everybody's running out of money. Over in Great Britain, in order to be able to afford their F-35s, they're retiring the Panavia Tornado, which was a very capable aircraft. But something you need to keep in mind right now, everyone was talking about this funding measure that Donald Trump just signed and how the Pentagon got a record $700 billion budget. It's all financed by debt. The U.S. government doesn't have money to fight a war. They're borrowing it all from the Federal Reserve. It's made up money out of thin air. So, now as you're probably already aware, it was a rough day on the Dow. It plunged. It hit a low of 735 down on the Dow, got up to about 400 down at the close of the market. And it's got a lot of people rattled about it, and everybody's pointing fingers back and forth as to what's doing it. Some are saying it was the tech stocks decline because they're in trouble. Amazon's stock dropped after Trump tweeted about their unfair deal with the U.S. Postal Service and how he wants to go after them. Facebook is in trouble. They're in so much trouble that they're actually starting to beg their users to come back. A little bit of cyber groveling going on over there. Same thing with Google and a lot of these other super large, supposedly too big to fail social media corporations. They're in trouble. And they certainly dragged the NASDAQ down. But the other factor, of course, is fears of a China trade war. And while it looked like at the end of last week that they may be pulling back from that, no, China uncorked this morning with tariffs on 128 U.S. products. And the stock market took a major dump, which reminds us our economy is too fragile to survive a trade war. Now, as you know, China has started selling oil futures contracts denominated in the yuan rather than the dollar. And so far, over 10 billion notional trades were carried out just in the first hour. Everybody's hopping on board of that. Now, another development that's out there, and this one is really going to cause some havoc. China has now announced they're going to start paying for imported crude oil in the yuan instead of the US dollar. We're getting this in a variety of places, including Reuters. Now, for most of the countries on Earth, that won't be a problem, because if you send China your oil and they send you a bunch of yuan, you can go back to China with the yuan and you can get GMO-free agricultural produce because they ban GMO in China. You can get very nicely manufactured products like the iPhone or the iPad, which the US can't actually make domestically. The only country who's not going to be happy with this, of course, is the United States of America. And they're going to say that this is definitely a major threat by China against US interests. That's always the catchphrase, US interests. I mean, some billionaire's upset. Now, what China is doing, pardon me, is what Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi tried to do: displace the US dollar's position of dominance in the oil trade. The problem is that the US simply went into Iraq, killed Saddam, and put Iraq's oil back on the market for the US dollar. Same thing with Libya. Went into Libya, killed Gaddafi, destroyed the gold dinar, put Libya's oil back on the market for the US dollar. China is not such an easy problem to deal with because they have a nuclear shield. China can succeed with this yuan attack on the dollar. The US government would be utterly insane to try and attack China. I mean, they might get into some skirmishes around the South China Sea or Taiwan, but they can't attack the Chinese mainland. First of all, China has got the world's largest army, and they're already there in China. Getting our army over there would require a massive convoy. We may not have enough ships. And China's got weapons to basically take those ships out. And if push comes to shove, China has nuclear weapons. And people want to get away from the dollar. They're tired of the control that comes with it. They're tired of the undue influence in their internal affairs that comes with accepting US dollars. Now here domestically, the subprime auto bubble appears to be bursting. Buyers are suddenly missing from showrooms. And as a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, when Claire and I, well, a month ago, when Claire and I bought the replacement for our stolen Honda, we noticed we were the only people on that car lot. So it's kind of out there. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, the US factory sector cooled in March, meaning manufacturing is again in decline. But prices for commodities are rising, which signals inflation. So a lot of people are talking about, on top of everything else, we may have an inflationary period to deal with here. Apparently, Elon Musk just cracked a joke on Twitter about a Tesla bankruptcy, and it was meant to be an April Fool's joke, but because of Tesla's problems with the car division, a lot of people took it seriously, and the Tesla stock took a major hit. 5% down. Got to be careful what you say to the people out there. Now, here's an article from Zero Hedge about McDonald's employees are furious because a while back in 2015, McDonald's announced they were going to have a wage hike to $1 above the minimum wage, although only in the corporate-owned stores. The franchise stores didn't have to go along with it. But it was basically put out as an example of corporate accountability and a direct repudiation of the far-left notion that quarterly capitalism and employers accepting responsibility for their employees were mutually exclusive. Well, it turns out it was unfortunately just a publicity stunt by McDonald's, and since 2015, the firm has essentially frozen all employee wages, leaving them just a few cents above minimum wage. And McDonald's employees are saying they can't pay their bills. They can't live on that. Now, this article sparked a little bit of a discussion between Claire and I, where she said, well, maybe they need to invest in some training and go on out and get some higher paying jobs, to which I came on back and I said, there are no higher paying jobs, or there are way too few. Right now, the people who are working at places like McDonald's, they're not upwardly mobile because the economy and the job market will not support it. So it's a drastic oversimplification of saying, just go on out and find another job. And this may vary from state to state, but there is something you need to understand about unemployment benefits. If your employer lets you go, you qualify for unemployment benefits. You'll get a check. It won't be much, but you'll get a check. If you leave because you can't live on what you're being paid, you get nothing. And that complicates the issue. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog, consumer spending doesn't look like it will be the backbone of the first quarter gross domestic product report like it was in the fourth quarter of last year. Now, of course, fourth quarter last year was the holiday shopping season. And remember when it was going on and they said, oh, it's the best holiday shopping season ever. Then after it was all over, they said, well, no, it wasn't all that great. But apparently in this first quarter gross domestic product report, they're expecting consumer spending won't be a major part of it. And that is a serious indication of the collapse of the consumer economy. Prior to that meltdown of the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, consumer spending in this country, cars, TVs, homes, clothing, whatever, was 60% of the entire economy. And now it's just in decline. So what's the largest sector of the economy right now? I would say probably the military-industrial complex. We're going into a wartime economy. Even the cryptocurrencies are having a lot of trouble. Now, apparently, gold is up a little, but the dollar is down. The stock market is down. In the first quarter of this year, even some of the biggest cryptocurrencies crashed as much as 88%. And the reason for that is there's no commodity base underneath it. That's why the dollar floats around. It was disconnected from its original commodity base, which was silver, and allowed to float freely. And today's dollar is worth just pennies of what the dollar originally was when it was still connected to silver back in the 1960s. Now, Hollywood is getting very, very nervous. They've just finished their March releases, and it hasn't really done all that well. They're holding out hopes for Spielberg's new film, Ready Player One, which I hear had a decent opening weekend. But part of the problem is that there's remakes. I mean, look at this. Another remake of Beauty and the Beast. And it seems like all the really creative, original people have been kicked out of Hollywood. And all that's left there are preening stars and the sex predators. But they're all politically correct. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Trump has renewed his attack on Amazon, saying that the post office scam must stop. And basically because of this arrangement where the U.S. Post Office is delivering Amazon packages at below cost, I'm amazed how Amazon got that deal. But the Postal Service will lose $1.50 on average for every package it delivers for Amazon. And saying the post office has to stop. They have to run on a business-like basis. And of course, Amazon stock took a hit. And it's beginning to look like these successful companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook are not successful because they're providing a good product at a good price to their customers. It's because they've got these special deals, special discounts from the post office, or they're harvesting your data and selling it off to marketers and who knows who all else. Now let's get into immigration and globalism here. As you're probably aware, there is this caravan of illegals heading toward the U.S. border. And I'm hearing all kinds of different numbers. The low end is 1,500. The high end is 5,000. Apparently people are just flocking to this thing. And what they're going to do is they're coming up there to Texas, and they're just going to punch on through. And obviously there aren't enough immigration and customs enforcement people to stop them. Trump may have to call out the army, because this isn't migration, this is an invasion. And looking at photos of this caravan of illegal immigrants, they all appear, or most of them appear, to be military-age males. They look like invaders. Now, one of the photos I saw, interestingly enough, this caravan apparently is supported by the government of Mexico, but I didn't see any Mexican police or army. They're being escorted. This caravan is being escorted by people in civilian clothes with these orange reflective vests, which suggests there's a non-governmental organization of some kind that has put this together to bring them into the U.S. And a lot of people are saying Trump better do something, or his credibility on protecting the borders is gone. Another article that came out of Investment Watch blog. We can have a border wall 100 feet high, but if every major city and big state has a welcome sign of illegal alien sanctuary, the wall won't work. Our nation needs a seamless web of enforcement, including federal, state, and local governments. Absolutely correct. The mayors of these sanctuary cities, the governors of these sanctuary states are not only undermining Trump's immigration policy, they're committing crimes under Title VIII. We need to start enforcing the laws that we already have. If Trump doesn't get a handle on all these illegal immigrants who are being allowed to vote in our elections, he will lose Congress this November, and he'll be a one-term president. The liberal Democrats are literally bartering away the nation built by the American people to illegal immigrants and refugees in exchange for votes. Because that's their lure. Come on in, we'll get you amnesty, we'll make you a citizen, we'll take stuff away from the people who've been here hundreds of years, and we'll give it to all you newcomers because that's just and fair, and you have a right to be here, and you have a right to all these other people's stuff. Which sounds suspiciously like socialism to me. Now, over in Hungary, the concern over the refugee crisis is fueling Viktor Orban. Despite all the criticism he is getting from Brussels, criticism, they hate him. They absolutely hate him. But he's soaring in the polls. And he looks like he is going to be victorious in Hungary's upcoming parliamentary elections. So there is a huge pushback all across Europe, and we need a pushback here. Anybody who wants to come here and be a citizen through the legally approved process, fine. Welcome, come on in, learn to get along with everybody, and everything will be fine. But people don't have a right to just go anywhere in the world that they want without restraint. Nations have a sovereign right to control their borders, and we need Donald Trump to exert that sovereign right now. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about immigration. I want to back up to the economy because something just crossed my desk that I think deserves a mention. As you know, out in California, they've legalized marijuana. But apparently, they're taxing it so much that the black market is still doing business because you can get your marijuana less expensively from them than from the government. Now, that really doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. The whole idea of legalizing any drug is to undermine the criminal element profiting from that drug by making the drug available at a lower price. And California got it wrong. So, rather interesting story there. Getting on back to immigration, story out of Al Jazeera, Black lives do not matter in Israel. And they're talking about the growing friction between the Ashkenazi Jews in Israel and the Ethiopian Jews. And it is really starting to erupt into view where blacks in Israel are being openly oppressed. They're in mortal danger. The government is talking about just shipping them all back to Africa. One of Israel's two chief rabbis, Yitzhak Yosef, called black people monkeys and the Hebrew equivalent of the N-word in his weekly sermon. And of course, Yosef is not going to face any repercussions. He was not demoted. He said exactly the same thing 2 years ago, that all non-Jews Africans, Arabs, or otherwise could only live in Israel if they agree to serve the country's Jewish population. And that is actually something that is in the Talmud, that the non-Jewish people only are allowed to exist to be of service to the Jews. So what's going on with this African migrant program? Well, Israel has decided to scrap the African migrant deportation, and instead they're just going to send them into Europe. As if Europe didn't have enough problems here. Now, getting on out back to California, Governor Jerry Brown has pardoned 5 nonviolent illegal aliens facing deportation, meaning he's signed pardons for them. They are out of jail. And he said, I did it because these were non-violent crimes. Well, these people were guilty of crimes like kidnapping, robbery, using a firearm, inflicting corporal injury, intent to terrorize, and obstructing a police officer. But now, if you're an illegal immigrant and you commit those crimes, Governor Jerry Brown will pardon you so that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement will not be able to take you out of the country. And apparently there was something like another 56 pardons and 14 commutations that were handed down to celebrate the season of Easter. Somebody needs to slap some handcuffs on these sanctuary people. They're in violation of Title VIII. They're breaking the law. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, we have talked before about this problem of the police basically being on a rampage against law-abiding citizens. Now, obviously, if a police officer is faced with a criminal who intends lethal force against the police officer has every right to defend themselves with lethal force. But the issue is the many, many times that the police are shooting people with no real justification for doing it. And it's always covered up by their department saying, well, it conforms with departmental policy. But we're seeing people who get shot for holding a cell phone in their hands. One guy got shot because he was trying to return a tool that he'd rented to an auto parts store. And it really is out of control. Our police are apparently being taught to shoot first and ask questions later, and that may be because so many police departments are now hiring Israeli security companies to train their officers. Another factor may be the fact that police are far higher per capita users of prescription antidepressant medications, and we know how those can mess up people's impulse control. But in 2017, police in the U.S. murdered at least 1,184 Americans. This was a survey conducted by the Free Thought Project. The number, however, may be much higher because the U.S. Justice Department does not keep records of police shootings, police killings, unjustified police. They don't want that information to be out there. They don't want you to know. Department of Justice doesn't want to be accountable for the problem. Meanwhile, of course, the correspondents and the prostitutes of the U.S. corporate media are still trying to push this gun grab story, this gun violence. You don't hear them talking about the 1,100 people that we know were wrongfully killed by the police. They want to focus on the supposed 17 down there in Parkland. Now, recent polls are showing that a majority of Americans believe that gun ownership makes people safer. And it does. The police are never present to thwart a crime in progress. When the crime is occurring, there are only 2 people there, the perpetrator and the victim. And the only way the crime does not go forward to success is if the victim is able to match forces, or even preferably superior force, to the perpetrator. That's just common sense. Look at that story from Kennesaw, Georgia. Now, Americans do not believe that people should be denied safety because of an occasional nutcase or a staged shooting to advance the gun control agenda. In fact, they are wondering who really is behind the gun control agenda. They wonder about these impressionable kids and these paid crisis actors protesting the Second Amendment instead of Washington's rush into conflict with the rest of the world. I mean, these are young kids. They're coming up on military age, and at some point there's going to be a draft, and these kids ought to be smart enough to realize that their right to safety is not threatened by law-abiding gun owners who handle their weapons safely. Their safety is threatened by the fact they could get drafted and dropped into a world war. And why they are not more aware of that, more concerned with that, seems to boggle the imagination. And then we find out about things like this. Story coming out of a Georgia middle school. Apparently, at the Hampton Middle School, teacher Corey Sanders literally assigned his entire class to write a gun control letter to their congressman. And I can't imagine that this is the only class where this is happening. They're using the public schools, taxpayer-funded schools, to mount a letter-writing campaign pushing one particular agenda. If I were a parent of one of those students, I would be raising all kinds of heck. Because that's not what the school is supposed to be doing. The school is supposed to be teaching my kid the necessary skills to enter the job market down the road. But boy, they're really pulling out all the stops on this one. They may realize this is the last time they can go to this well. Too many people have become aware of the stage shootings. Too many people have become aware of the reality that when gun ownership is restricted from law-abiding citizens, crime and violent crime go up. Look at places like Chicago. It's held up as the model of gun control legislation, and it's rapidly becoming the murder capital of the country. Then you have the opposite, Kennesaw, Georgia. Every home required to have a gun, and crime plummeted. The gun grabbers are not interested in keeping you safe. The gun grabbers are interested in having you under their control. Every dictatorship in history disarms its population. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So in the vein of the zero tolerance gun policy, we've been hearing all these bizarre stories about kids who get in trouble because they'll take some bites out of their Pop-Tart and it looks like a gun shape. Or somebody will pick up a stick that looks like a gun. Or they'll just point their finger and go bang, bang, and they're in trouble. Well, apparently, there's a student who's been suspended from school for drawing a stick figure holding a gun. And the father is very upset. It was basically a doodle page, and there were a lot of things on there. Cars, towers, and the stick figure holding a gun looked like a hunter. And as it turns out, this student's father does a lot of hunting. The kid goes along with him, knows how to handle a gun. Now, according to Washington, D.C. Detective Scott Earhart, March for Our Lives applied for a demonstration permit several months before. That means before the Parkland shooting. Now, on their website, they said this movement is for kids, and by kids, March for Our Lives organizers are the kids themselves. Well, behind the 501c4, we're beginning to find out there are some very powerful grown-ups who are behind this. But apparently these permits were applied for long before Parkland. So how wonderfully lucky for the anti-gun marchers that just before they're going to go to Washington, D.C. for their long scheduled protest, there's a mass shooting at Parkland. What an amazing coincidence. Just absolutely unbelievable coincidence, isn't it? A lot of people have pointed out how this David Hogue is being promoted as the media darling of the anti-gun movement. And he's out there making all kinds of outrageous claims about guns and gun deaths. And what's really interesting is the corporate media isn't correcting him. They're not challenging him. Now, during an appearance on Headline News, SE Cup Unfiltered program, the host of the misnamed CNN program Reliable Sources basically noted that he allowed David Hogue to get away with making patently false claims about the National Rifle Association that a media guy focused on truth ought not to have let happen. Now, Steller's admission came after host S.E. Cupp questioned him about the wisdom of the media's obsession with elevating only the kids pushing gun control. So basically, Steller's just blurted out that he let the gun control advocate get away with lying to CNN's viewers. A disservice is a strong word, but when I was interviewing David Hogue only 10 days ago, 10 days after the massacre, there were a few times I wanted to jump in and say, let's correct that fact, but he did not. And of course, we know there are a lot of kids at that high school who are pro-Second Amendment and pro-gun. They're out there trying to hold rallies. They're getting no media coverage whatsoever, except on the independent media. Now, it turns out that David Hogue had a Reddit account, and it was under the name Davis Green 111. And there's a lot of interesting information in there. Basically, the poll board on 4chan speculated that Davis Green 111 was David Hogue, and today Big League Politics has confirmed it. Davis Green 111 on Reddit is David Hogue, and the most popular post on that Reddit account is a link to David Hogue's lifeguard confrontation video. That's the video that originally caused speculation that Hogue was actually living in Redondo Beach, California, and not Florida. Well, yes, he did live in Redondo Beach, California. He graduated Redondo Beach High School. Then his family moved to Florida, and he's been over there pretending to be a student at this high school. But if you look at him very carefully, he looks older than 18. Now, even more alarming, looking at the Reddit post from late 2017, basically, David Hogue is out there saying that mass killing of billions of people by mosquitoes would be great for the environment. This guy is a full-blown liberal nutcase. He despises humanity. He celebrates the mass killing of billions of people because we've got to fight against climate change. David Hogue, like so many people that have gone through the liberal public school system, they're being taught that humans are bad and must be eliminated through depopulation schemes. Now, I concede the human population is growing and it is very, very large. Just trying to drive around the roads on Oahu, they're much more congested than they were when we moved here, and they haven't been expanded. In fact, they took a lane out of Kamehameha for the light rail system. But I have a real problem with billionaires like Bill Gates or anybody else going on out and assuming the godlike power to decide who will live and who will die. Yes, there will always be a human population problem because sex is a lot more fun than dying. And if you really believe, if you truly believe the world is overpopulated, do something about it. Find a really tall building, jump off it, hit a banker on the way down. But don't you dare go around taking on the power of a god to decide who will live, who will die, who will reproduce, and who will not. Because the last person who did that had a Charlie Chaplin mustache and a big armband with a swastika on it. Now, as you may have heard, the wife of the Paris Pulse nightclub shooter was found not guilty of aiding his jihad. Now, the entire case against her was the FBI claimed she had confessed to them, that she had known about her husband acquiring weapons, watching Islamic State videos, and discussing possible locations in preparation for the attack. Now, defense lawyers argued correctly that Ms. Solomon's statement, obtained after more than 11 hours of questioning without a lawyer, amounted to a false confession. And we don't know if she actually did confess. This is the FBI we're talking about. And the jury agreed. We can't take the FBI's word about anything, and she was found not guilty on all counts. Okay, getting on back to this transgender, gender fluidity, gender identity thing, and this stuff keeps happening. Target, of course, is an ultra-liberal establishment. They pride themselves on allowing biological men to use the women's restroom if they just say, I self-identify as a woman. And the policy, which goes back to 2016, outraged conservatives for fear it would put women and girls at risk, and sure enough, it just happened. According to NBC Chicago, police are now on the hunt for a man who basically went into the women's restroom and pushed into this little girl's stall and exposed himself. Now that is pretty sick, and I hope they catch this guy. But this has just gone to ridiculous levels. I don't know to what degree this little girl is being traumatized, but this is far too great a price to pay for all these liberals to run around and say, I can be a man today or a woman tomorrow or anything. Well, to the management of Target, I self-identify as your CEO, and you're all fired. Oh, this is another one. We've been hearing more and more about this. Started last week, where there was this academic paper that came on out and said that meritocracy was discriminatory against women. It created a sense of exclusion, which was a rather risky position to take when you consider that it was an all-woman team that designed that pedestrian bridge at Florida International University that collapsed before it could even be opened. And now, of course, we find out the same company that designed that bridge designed the guided railway system for our light rail. We, as a nation, we have to have the best doing whatever needs to be done. We can't just take critical infrastructure and say, well, we're going to hand it to this ethnic group because this ethnic group is underrepresented in engineering. If you hand out things like that on the basis of a quota system, where's the motive and the incentive to be a better engineer? There should be competition. I want to be a better engineer than that person over there, without regard to race, creed, color, gender, or orientation. But apparently Tucker Carlson actually had somebody come on his show to say that skills-based hiring is racist. And this is right out of a Monty Python sketch, where there's a casting office and they're casting for a new version of Samson and Delilah, and there's an actor there who wants to try out for Samson, and he's only got one leg. And he gets very upset that he can't get the part. He says, you're discriminating against me. If skills are not an important part of getting a job, then children in school aren't motivated to learn skills, are they? Can you see how destructive of our nation and our society this kind of thinking is? We have to have the best of the best of the best at everything doing those key jobs. When you want to say, I'm not being discriminatory, it means I'm going to take the best qualified person, regardless of race, creed, color, gender, orientation. But doing that in reverse and saying, I'm not going to hire the most qualified person because I need to have a woman in that spot, that is discrimination. And when you look at all of this nonsense, where all of a sudden white males are now under attack in our culture, we're going to wind up like South Africa. In fact, there was an article somebody just posted, one of the members posted. Apparently, there is a school coordinator in Connecticut arrested after announcing a desire to execute every white man. Can you see the dangerous direction that we are going? Well, anyway, as you know, this last weekend was Easter. And for a lot of places in this country, it didn't look like Easter. It was a white Easter. Apparently, this late spring snowfall hit New York City and New Jersey, causing commuting delays. More than 200 flights had to be canceled. The Yankees were forced to postpone their home opener. This is the time of the year when we're supposed to be fully into spring. Baseball season, played in the outdoors. And I'm getting pictures, videos from people, including family members. Now, it's not a lot of snow, but it's about 4 or 5 inches in April. And apparently, there's going to be snow continuing across the northern part of our country for the next few days. And there's a jet stream entrenched over the northern United States will allow the beginning of April to remain cooler than normal and bring shots of snow across northern sections of the country. And eventually, it's going to hit the Pacific Northwest. This is April. Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Maybe everybody's still on a sugar rush from all the Easter eggs and chocolate bunnies from yesterday. But, you know, please do call on in. Now, we're on the subject of human-caused global warming. And we have another classic case of a liberal judge basically just imposing their political agenda on what should be the letter of the law. You've all seen the classic statue of justice. It's the figure of a woman with a blindfold on, holding a scale and a sword. It's supposed to be fair. Well, apparently, there were some protesters that climbed into a construction trench on Tuesday, and they were charged with trespassing and disturbing the peace. And apparently Judge Mary Ann Driscoll dismissed all the criminal charges on the grounds their actions were necessary to prevent climate change. One of the protesters was Corinna Gore, the daughter of former Vice President Al Gore. And Judge Mary Ann Driscoll said the defendants are not responsible, saying she agreed with their argument that the actions were necessary to combat climate change. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First and foremost, that climate change, or now the new one, climate disruption, is a rebranding of what they were calling global warming just a few years ago. Because as this late April snow demonstrates, the world isn't warming. It isn't warming at all. Second, now that they're saying it's climate change, climate always changes. There's no way to stop it. So the judge was just, it was wholly inappropriate. We're seeing a political system that is coming down hard on conservatives, and basically liberals are getting a free pass. Remember all the violence that happened after Hillary Clinton lost the election, all the rioting that was going on? Hardly anybody got arrested. Hardly anybody got prosecuted unless they were stupid enough to actually attack the cops themselves. We're raising a generation of spoiled children who think they can behave any way they want to at all, and nothing will happen. As long as they say, oh, you're microaggressing me, you're invading my space. Now, last night, Claire and I were watching a show on Smithsonian Channel. Which, despite its close ties to the U.S. government, it does produce some really good documentaries. And they had one about the Earth as seen from space. And they were showing about how some glaciers are getting smaller, and then they were showing how the snow on the top of Kilimanjaro has been shrinking over the last several years. And we were getting ready for the usual thing, it's human-caused global warming. I have to tip my hat to the Smithsonian, because they were very honest in acknowledging that the reason Kilimanjaro is losing its snow cap is because of the massive deforestation that's been going on at the base. Because plant life will take water from the soil and put it back up in the air, from which it can then go on up, become rain or snow, and fall back down. And in a lot of these areas where the snow is going away, or the ice is going away, or the water is going away, and they're blaming human-caused global warming, you're usually seeing it in conjunction with massive deforestation. So Smithsonian was surprisingly honest on that particular one. Now, when you go to get a vaccination, the little ampule comes in a box, and in the box is this little tiny paper insert. It's a very tiny piece of paper, which is printed with very fine lettering, and the pharmaceutical companies are saying they only do that to save weight and shipping costs. No, they don't want you reading that. They want you to believe that what that medicine does is what the TV commercial told you that it does. And if you cannot read that package insert, even with the magnifier built into your Swiss Army knife, you can go over to the FDA's online biologics blood vaccines website. And every product package insert that is out there in your doctor's office is copied there as well. And according to the FDA's online biologics blood vaccines document, a vaccine manufacturer admits on its package insert their vaccinations can cause autism as one of many adverse reactions. And the adverse events reported including post-approval use of Tripedia vaccine, including idiopathic well, I'm not even going to try and read that. It's more letters than I have teeth. But basically, they're actually admitting it on those package inserts and at the website. They're counting on people not bothering to do their due diligence. Oh, I saw this on a TV commercial. There was this really pretty girl and I identify with her, or I want to be with her. And she had this illness that I also have, and she took this medicine. And in the closing shots of the commercial, she's doing wonderfully. I have to have that. That's not how you should be planning your medical care. But they're now admitting, after all these years of denial and debate and back and forth, they're now admitting, yes, there is a link between these vaccines and autism. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about vaccinations, and there's an interesting little story that came out of Natural Blaze, and it has to do with a young lady named Christina Rochelle Tarsal, who died from an arrhythmia induced by an autoimmune response to the HPV vaccine. This has been in the courts for 8 years and was finally concluded in favor of the plaintiffs. And the reason it dragged on for 8 years is the lawyers for the pharmaceutical agency, and apparently the judge initially went along with this, were saying that the family couldn't document that the arrhythmia did not exist before she got the HPV vaccine, even though the family had more than a few doctors, family doctors, specialists that had been seeing her, who confirmed the arrhythmia arrived after the HPV vaccine. It dragged out for 8 years. I can imagine the family is hovering on the edge of bankruptcy because of all the legal fees. But in the end, the court ruled that yes, the Gardasil vaccine kills. Alrighty, let's take a phone call. We finally got one. Sovereign Man, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The whole legalization issue.
Yes.
Legalization is not the answer. It will not bring down the price of anything. It will increase the price and make people to abrogate their...
What are we legalizing?
Well, basically, right now, we would say that the thing is cannabis.
Okay, you're talking about that story where California is taxing recreational marijuana so much that the black market is still thriving because it's cheaper.
Well, I see what the feds and the state take with liquor and tobacco taxes.
Yes.
More than half the cost of the product.
Yes.
It's off the chart. And you know, it doesn't mean that the quality is any better because, number one, the cigarettes have 3,500 chemicals in them. So, what's next? Legalize growing your own tomatoes? I mean, we have unalienable right to these things.
Yes, we do.
So we should abrogate our right through contract?
I grew up in a time when you could make all this stuff for yourself. My grandfather had a personal still, and it was perfectly legal to have as long as you didn't sell or give away the product. And he just had this little still out behind his hunting cabin up in the White Mountains, and it was just a little tiny one for his personal consumption. You know, he'd buy tobacco, which was a taxed product, but he'd roll his own cigars. And yeah, you could provide for yourself on your land, but more and more we're seeing this fascist desire to basically make it illegal to provide anything for ourselves. They don't want you growing food on your own property. They don't want you growing your own medicine on your own property. They don't even let you collect rainwater on your own property. The model is everything you need to leave is commoditized and sold to you by some corporation somewhere. That's the dystopian future we're going into.
Hey, well, the state is a corporation.
Yes.
Yeah, there's the sub-corporations of the United States Corporation. The answer is decriminalization.
Well, if you're talking about illegal drugs, yes, that's worked in pretty much every other country where they've tried it.
That's a relative term. That's a relative term. What is legal? What does that mean? Legal means to make lawful what would otherwise be.
Well, I think the criminal. Okay, Sovereign Man, you need to stop cutting me off because I want to make a point here. Having traveled a good part of the world, I have gone to many countries where the penalties for drugs like heroin and meth and cocaine are little more than a traffic ticket. They're not totally legal, but they're decriminalized. The aim for that is to basically get the big crime lords out of the drug trade by making it unprofitable. Because it's like we saw here in the United States during Prohibition. The instant they declared illegal all drinkable alcohol, the purveyors of that alcohol all of a sudden discovered their product was worth 50 to 100 times as much as it had been before. And that kind of money lured in the criminal element. And there was bootlegging and rum running and speakeasies and hidden rooms and all of that stuff. And these criminal gangs, the gangsters, acquired enough money to literally reshape the entire government of the United States to its own interests. And at that point, Prohibition was repealed so that potential competitors for control of the nation didn't have that kind of cash flow accessible to them. Now, of course, they've been superseded by the drug runners. And the reason that drugs are kept illegal is to keep them profitable, to keep them under control, to keep the market monopolized. And to guarantee those high profits. And everywhere in the world I've gone where it's been decriminalized, it has become unprofitable. You're not going to have people going to the schoolyard and handing out free samples of drugs to kids because there's just no point to it. If the kids get interested, they're going to go to these little clinics and stuff where they can buy the drugs. There are countries in Europe where all of these drugs are perfectly legal. You can go to the pharmacy and you can buy meth and you can buy opium and you can buy whatever you want. And they don't have the problems with crime and drug crime that we have here in the United States of America.
Opium War number 3. That's what's going on. The CIA is bringing it in.
Yes. They have this rich supply in Afghanistan. Prior to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban had eradicated the opium crop. Then the U.S. goes on in, puts in a puppet government, and the poppies are blooming, and there are bumper crops, and we've got photos of coalition forces, American soldiers guarding and protecting those poppy fields. And all of a sudden, opium is just flowing into the United States, both illegally on the streets and through the pharmaceutical industries, leading to our current opioid crisis. That's where it all came from.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with the allegory of the Wizard of Oz?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, they were put to sleep when they were crossing the poppy fields.
That one, yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, what the Wicked Witch said was, ring around the rosy a pocket full of spears. What the hell is that, Mike?
Well, it's a reference. It's
that's
another
what.
reference to. It's a reference to a rhyme that came out of the time of the Great Plagues. Ring around, Rosie.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay,
Let
sovereign
me
man.
say,
Sovereign
let
man.
me finish, Mike.
Sovereign.
Let me finish.
You won't let me finish. Okay, and
No, I just want to make a statement.
all right, make one statement.
Or the cocaine, the heroin, and a pocket full of spears is hypodermic needles.
Well, I mean, if that's the way that you want to see it, yeah. But we know that
that's what's in the movie.
Well, the Wicked Witch of the West is surrounded by her troops carrying spears. So I don't think we need to look any further than that. Anyway, Sovereign Man, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. You know, we each take turns telling our side of the story. You know, the Native Americans used to have something called a talking stick when they would meet in their lodges. And it was basically an arrow with lots of extra decoration on it, shells and stuff. And the rule was the person holding that stick got to talk, and everybody else stayed silent. Then they would hand the stick on and hand the stick on, and that's how they kept debates civilized here. Unfortunately, this being radio, I can't hand a talking stick through the phone line here. All right, the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. So getting on back to science and tech here. A team of researchers has discovered that slightly over 90% of tortillas sold in Mexico contain traces of GMO corn. Now, the study was done by the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and it found that 82% of all corn products, such as tostadas, flour, cereals, and snacks, contain some level of genetically modified sequences. The researchers also found the herbicide glyphosate in approximately 27.7 of the samples that tested positive for transgenic corn. Now, a couple of things we take out of this. First of all, that GMO pollen does not stay in the GMO farm plots. Monsanto officially says you need a 10-yard buffer zone and the pollen will not get out of there. That's ridiculous. Pollen can travel for miles on the wind, on insects, on birds. We've had examples of supposedly natural organic crops being contaminated by GMO genes from states away. This stuff is spreading all over. Now, the idea that these food products are contaminated with glyphosate, we're going to start seeing the cancer rates go right through the roof. All in the name of profits. Somebody just sent me in an email suggesting that the men who are going into the restrooms and flashing girls are actually conservatives trying to put a negative spin on the poor transgender people. Yeah, sure, we believe that one. A British man has contracted the world's first and worst super gonorrhea, a sexually transmitted infection after returning from Southeast Asia. Now, gonorrhea is the second most common bacterial sexually transmitted illness in Great Britain. It's transmitted through unprotected vaginal, oral, and anal sex. And people are often unaware they're carrying the disease as it doesn't present any symptoms, at least for a while. But left untreated can cause pelvic inflammatory disease, ectopic pregnancy, and infertility. Now, Public Health England says it's the first global report of a strand resistant to standard antibiotics. And, oh, that's right. It's the first Monday of the month. The sirens just went off, and I was wondering if we had another ballistic missile thing coming on in here. But apparently this individual who has a male partner in the UK had sex with a woman in Southeast Asia and picked up the bug. You've got to be careful about that sort of thing. You really do. And one of the reasons we're seeing so many antibiotic-resistant bugs is because of the overuse of antibiotics and the incomplete use of antibiotics. If you've ever had an illness and your doctor will give you an antibiotic and they'll make a point of saying, finish all the medicine. And the reason they do that is because people have a tendency, when they start to feel better, they forget to take their pills. And what they don't realize is the infection is still in their body. It's attenuated, it's weakened, but it's going to start growing back. And it's going to grow back because it's the survivor of the antibiotic. It'll develop an antibiotic resistance. Now, Hewlett-Packard has launched a new line of germicide-resistant computers meant for use in hospitals. A lot of people are very concerned that hospitals obviously have to be kept as sterile and sanitary as possible because of the large number of people coming through there with highly contagious diseases. And a big part of the problem are the computers. And you can get computers that are wipe-proof or waterproof, but if you try and use a germicide, some of the chemicals in the germicide can actually erode the plastic. So Hewlett-Packard has come out with a new line of special computers specially designed for hospitals that can be sanitized with these germicides and survive. I think that's a good idea. There's a lot of reasons why I'm not a big fan of Hewlett-Packard. This, I think, was a really good idea. Because the more complicated hospital rooms become, there's more nooks and crannies where bacteria and pathogens can hide. Okay, Facebook apparently has been saving videos that Facebook users thought they had deleted, including clips their friends recorded but never posted. They're saving all of it. Boy, their data service just must be gigantic. And so it looks like this wave of criticism over Facebook's data collection, it's not letting up because every day there's something else that's coming on out about some other way they're keeping track of you, some way they're recording metadata. Maybe the NSA contracted out surveillance of the American people to Google and Facebook and Twitter, because they're certainly acting like that's their job now. Just keep copies of all your information. Now, Facebook is saying they're going to start deleting all that stuff, but do you really trust them at this point? I certainly don't. I do not at all. Now, some years ago, back in 2016, one of Mark Zuckerberg's most trusted lieutenants, Andrew Bosworth, circulated a memo called The Ugly. And basically the memo's position was that Facebook has to grow and that all that they do to grow is justified. All the questionable contact importing practices, all the subtle language that helps people stay searchable by friends, all the work to bring more communication in. And he wrote in another section of the memo, so we connect more people. That can be bad if they make it negative. Maybe it costs somebody a life by exposing somebody to bullies. Maybe somebody dies in a terrorist attack according to our tools. Well, apparently Andrew is trying to backpedal on that memo and saying that perhaps in hindsight, a little more concern for the safety of the users would have been appropriate. And yes, it should have been. Now, I can understand you're young, you're in a hugely successful company, you're obviously upward mobile, and all you can see is bonuses at the end of the next quarterly report, and you just want your creation to grow and grow and grow. But it's an illustration of how our priorities as a nation have become skewed. Yes, we all want to be rich. I'd love to be rich. I don't need to be Zuckerberg rich, but I'd like to be comfortable. I'd like to support Claire in the lifestyle to which I'd like her to become accustomed. But there has to be a balance. That you're not there abusing your customers, you're not betraying your customers, that you are in fact showing some kind of business ethics. That you're providing a good product or a good service at a good price, and you don't abuse your customers, because when they find out, which is what's happening now, bad things will happen. We're going to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line when we come on back, so stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call now from Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's not just Facebook, I mean, we really shouldn't pick on one. We should pick on all of them. You're on YouTube right now. I'm watching you. As you well know, that YouTube is a monopoly. Mm-hmm. They all do the same thing. I mean, it's cheap, right? all this data they store. I mean, just recently I had to replace a RAID array that went for a dump after about 7 years, and I doubled the size. And you know what, Mike? It cost me about 50% more than it did, about 7, 8 years ago. So, and the funny thing about Facebook is the quality is just not there compared to, let's say, YouTube, where they actually have 1080p videos and the sound isn't that bad, and blah blah blah. But I mean, let's face it, anybody that goes onto Facebook or any other social media puts their stuff out there, it gets monetized by other people, and they get nothing for it.
Yes,
it's a scam. That's all it is. It's a big scam.
Yep,
they're idiots, right? And you know what, Mark Zuckerberg, I'm sorry to say it, but he was right. He was absolutely right with what he said. People are stupid, and it's too bad. I mean, hopefully they're learning now with this information that's out there. But honestly, do you really think they're going to?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to hope that they do, but there is so much going on in the world, except for those of us who work in the independent media. We simply can't keep track of it all. But I think what has outraged people with regard to Facebook was that their public pronouncements when they launched the company was, your data is your data. And people listened to that, and now they're feeling that they were lied to, and nobody likes being lied to, and that their data isn't their data anymore. And they're very upset about that.
Well, I years and years ago, I was on it for maybe a year or two, and I read the fine print when I joined up, and I knew right away that, you sign your life away when you join those kinds of social media websites. I mean, there's so many of them out there now, too, Mike. I mean, like Reverb Nation. I don't know whether you ever heard of that, but it's for people that can post their own music and that. And you can actually sell it, online, like get a better version, because they're obviously crummy little MP3s, probably 64 kilobits a second or something like that. I don't really have a problem with those sort of sites per se, but I mean, they're all there for a reason, and it's just to harvest our data and to get as much as they can for it. There was a write-up on the CBC today about, Aeroplan? One of those, like kind of air mile places where they were sending out some kind of stupid questionnaire, and, they got called on it and blah, 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 and everybody's up in arms. And I mean, and of course, they write a story that basically pits the left against the right, which is, of course, beautiful, right? Divide and conquer. And, once again, censorship, is just reigning supreme. It's horrible. The world is horrible right now.
It really is. As the economy tightens up, business becomes more predatory. We're not seen as customers, we're seen as fodder. Anyway, Al, we're going to let you go. We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take another phone call from Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello to you both.
Aloha.
I've got an odd question for you. In light of what various media outlets are online and in regular life and so forth and so on, they're in business for whatever reason it is. I got a question for you. Why deny them, whether it's the social media, the pharmaceutical industry, the biotech industry, the military-industrial complex, or whatever have you, from treating the everyday person as a willing ATM machine? Why deny them that?
Well, because I don't want to be an ATM machine.
Well, I'm asking that sarcastically, because that's exactly what they are treating the everyday person as.
Yes.
Unless the everyday person actually wakes up and realizes, I'm getting screwed. But they're not. A lot of people are, but not everyone has. So until people actually realize that they're actually being used for that, then they'll finally get a clue and say, oh, crap. So I just thought I'd ask that sarcastically because I observe that every day, and I'm like, sometimes I'll have a chance to actually ask somebody about that, and they're like, you got a point there. I'm like, I wish I didn't. So,
Well, we've been
thanks so
talking.
much.
You got it. Thank you very much for the phone call. We've been pointing out how, as the economy tightens and as we descend into fascism, the attitude of corporations and government is whatever you can sell them as long as it's making money. And that's why we have medicines that don't heal and in some cases make us sick. We have products that wear out way too quickly. It's all about just harvesting money. Where the system breaks down, though, is when ordinary working people don't have the money to be harvested. And that's where we are right now when we look at that article about McDonald's, which went back on their promise for pay hikes, and their employees can't live on the money they're making there, which means they certainly don't have anything left over to go into the stores and shopping malls. And that's where it's all starting to collapse here. And let's see, there was a story here about mall vacancies reaching a 6-year high as retail slump batters local economies. And again, if all the money is crammed up there at the top, the 1%ers, the consumer economy is going to collapse. Those 1%ers, there's not enough of them to support a national consumer economy. They're not going to buy 1,000 TV sets each. They're only going to buy one, maybe two. Going on back to George Herbert Walker Bush, we started to see this transition where the American people were made to cover losses for foreign investors. That's what the SNL bailout was all about. Bush was sending a message to other countries: we are now a fascist economy. You can safely invest your money here, and if you make money, you can keep it. And if you lose money, the people will be forced to cover it, because that is exactly how fascism works economically. And there have been several more demonstrations since then. And we've seen this incredible growing wealth inequality. But we've reached the point now where there is so little money in circulation in the middle and especially the working class, the consumer economy is collapsing. We reported it earlier in the show. In the last quarter of last year, consumer spending was the backbone of the gross domestic product report because of the holiday shopping season. This first quarter, not going to be there. And as the economy gets even tighter, it's going to get even more predatory. Now, apparently over in the Observer, they're claiming that Cambridge Analytica harvested data from 50 million Facebook accounts. They found that Cambridge Analytica's Alexander Kogan collected data from 270,000 accounts and was able to access data from all their friends, on average 185 users per account, making up the total of 50 million. This does seem to add up. Now, the Guardian app's privacy policy reveals they also collect data from your Facebook account and the accounts of all your friends. This data includes your name, profile picture, gender, networks, user ID, and any other information you choose to share according to your Facebook account settings. So, and it's been happening for years. Now, I don't know about you, but even back in the heyday of Usenet and Unix, I never put personal information out there online. That was just dumb. And especially young people today have to be told, you have to avoid the temptation to feel that you're engaged in a deeply personal conversation with the other person on the other side of that net. Basically, you're in a crowded room and everybody is watching what you do and listening to everything that you say, and you should conduct yourself appropriately. All right, we're going to do a shout out now for our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And once again, our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Article out of Natural News talking about how Google is trying to push what they call the final solution to independent media, to get rid of the independent media here on the web. And basically, Google plans to invest $300 million into a new algorithm that, for all intents and purposes, threatens to permanently destroy the independent news industry. Known as the Google News Initiative, the program will redirect advertising dollars back to mainstream publishers and away from many up-and-coming news outlets that have broken free from the Wall Street propaganda machine. Google is saying it will begin to work with publishers to elevate accuracy, meaning the official story, quality content, and stem the flow of misinformation and disinformation, which is just code speak for censorship. We in the independent media have taken away corporate media and the government's ability to lie to you, the public, with impunity. They want it back. But if they think that shutting down the independent media is going to return you all to being naive, trusting, gullible fools overnight, it's not going to happen. It will be decades before the American people have gotten over lies about Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons or Assad's sarin gas. The polls are showing it. Trust in the corporate media and the government is at an all-time record low. And silencing or trying to silence the independent media is not going to change that. Now, apparently, 2 weeks ago, the city of Atlanta's municipal government was hit with a crippling ransomware attack that has wiped out millions of government files and left the city's police and first responders relying on paper record keeping. And so far, the city has made almost no progress in recovering their files. Police still don't have access to vital databases and investigative files. The town's auditor says the city books have been destroyed, aside from whatever's left in the paper record. And top city officials were scrambling through this holiday weekend to try and piece together bits of city projects from personal computers and email addresses that weren't affected by the hack. Almost every government department was hit by the ransomware, though fortunately 10 of the 18 machines in the city's auditor's office somehow avoided the hack. Okay, where is the National Security Agency in all of this? Aren't they supposed to be the experts at protecting America's IT infrastructure? Isn't that what they get all the money for? Isn't that why they have all these data centers? I mean, this government seems to think it can win a war on terror. It can't even track down the ransomware writers and the hackers. Every time there's another one of these ransomware attacks, it proves the impotence of the U.S. federal government to actually run this country in a manner that is in the best interest of the American people. Cybercrime is rampant. Scams are rampant. Phone scams are rampant. It's open season on the American people, and this government is unable or unwilling to try and do anything about it. Now, health and fitness tracking app Under Armour has had a data security breach, and information on 150 million of their users has been compromised. Now, I imagine in this day and age that pretty much everybody is using as much computer security as they can. But we keep hearing about all these hardware problems embedded in the actual chips. We have to wonder, is this some little mandated NSA backdoor? And are the cyber criminals finding and exploiting these NSA mandated backdoors? We know a lot of NSA and CIA hacking tools were leaked out onto the dark web. Talk about Frankenstein's monster. CIA and NSA created these horrible cyber weapons, and now they're being directed against the American people. Or alternatively, are CIA and NSA the cyber criminals? Have they turned these intelligence agencies into the online version of the civil forfeiture laws to plunder the American people by a desperately broke and hopelessly in debt government? There's been a huge credit card heist, apparently involving multiple stores, higher-end stores, Saks Fifth Avenue, Lord & Taylor. The breach was first discovered by cybersecurity firm Gemini Advisory and was later confirmed by the Hudson's Bay Company, one of Canada's largest retail groups with a specific focus on the luxury market. The Hudson's Bay Company owns Saks Fifth Avenue, Saks Off Fifth, and Lord & Taylor. So it's just wide out there. Part of the problem is we've made these systems too complex. They're too difficult to understand. That's why it's too difficult to protect them against the hackers. The hacker's full-time job is figuring out ways in. Everybody else, we've got other jobs that we're doing. Running a Lord & Taylor's, running a Saks Fifth Avenue, running a website, doing a radio show. The hackers, all they do all day and night long is figure out ways to get into your data and steal it and sell it. And again, where is the NSA in all of this? Aren't they actually able to do the job that we're told they're doing? Or how about the FBI? All of these hacks cross state lines. That pulls it right into FBI jurisdiction. We'll hear about one hacker getting arrested maybe once every, 5-6 months? Story out of Blacklisted News. Apparently, the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court is saying that it is okay for the police to use the E911 service to perform warrantless real-time tracking. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, several years ago, the U.S. government mandated all cell phones have a GPS chip in them. And the first couple of years, the end user couldn't even access the chip. But it was there to support what was called E911, where if you called 911 from your cell phone, the police and fire department would know where you were, which sounded like a good idea. And of course, today, that GPS is available for your mapping, location services, and so forth. But that E911 service is still in there. But apparently, the police are using it to basically see where you are. They'll simply contact your phone over the cell system, and your phone will obediently tell them where you are on the surface of planet Earth. And it is warrantless surveillance. But apparently the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court says it's fine. It's absolutely fine. You have no right to privacy of where you're going. And I resent that because I don't want the police to know I stopped at a donut shop on the way home from work and had a jelly donut. It's none of their business. That Fourth Amendment is one of the most important rights in the Bill of Rights. It says the police can't just look at you and watch you to see if you're doing something wrong. They have to know by evidence, by testimony under oath, that you're engaged in something criminal. Then they can come on in and invade your privacy. And we're losing that. Our entire Bill of Rights is under attack. Now, over in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, Julian Assange has been cut off from the net. And apparently, because of his critical tweets about the recent detention of Catalan President Carles Puigdemont in Germany and pressure from the U.S., Spanish, and British governments, the Ecuadorian government has installed an electronic jammer to stop Assange communicating with the outside world over the internet or over the phone. I presume they're jamming the cell phone and Wi-Fi signals. Now, 27 writers, journalists, filmmakers, artists, academics, former intelligence officers, and Democrats have called on the government of Ecuador in an open letter signed by them all to allow Julian Assange his right of freedom of speech. Because we cannot tolerate any voice for truth and freedom being silenced. It's a threat to us all. If they get away with it with Julian Assange, they'll say, well, hey, we need to do it to these other people. We need to do it to John Stadmiller. We need to do it to Michael Herzog. We need to do it to Michael Rivero. They're saying things we don't like. Well, you can't have freedom of speech and not hurt some people's feelings, especially those who've got something to hide. The liberals go around saying they want an offense-free environment. That's impossible if you have freedom of speech. If you're out there telling the truth, somebody somewhere is not going to like it. And this idea of political correctness, that we should voluntarily silence ourselves out of concern that somebody in the billions of people living on this planet might suffer a microaggression from what we say, then we've already surrendered to this dystopian future. We have to preserve freedom of speech. We have to be able to stand up and say back to the corporate TV networks, you're not telling the truth. We have to be able to say to David Hogue, what you're claiming about the NRA is nonsense. We have to be able to say to the government of Israel, your treatment of the Palestinians is an abomination and a war crime. Because that's what freedom of speech is all about. It's not about art on a wall with bovine feces or strip clubs or any of that other stuff. It is about the right to criticize government about what they are doing. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Laura in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Earlier in the broadcast, you were talking about a man with a mustache that had killed many people.
Yes.
I wonder if you're talking about Stalin, Lenin, or Trotsky, or Gingrich Yagoda.
They'd all fit in, but none of them had a Charlie Chaplin mustache.
I mean, people always want to pick on Adolf Hitler, which is fine, but you forget about the millions and millions of Christian people in Russia that were killed by Stalin and all them.
It's a valid point. You raise a valid point. My issue was that all of these billionaires who are out there saying that we need to kill off part of the world's population, they're operating from the same moral place as a Stalin or a Pol Pot or an Adolf Hitler or any other tyrant that just says, I don't like these people being around, I'm going to kill them off.
I just wish more people would not always just talk about Adolf Hitler, because they need to be reminded that these people killed millions, facilitate the deaths of millions and millions of people. And Gingrich Yagoda, nobody even knows his name. He's credited with killing more people single-handedly than anybody else ever had. Nobody even knows his name.
Well, I guess he didn't succeed in getting into the history books with it. But your point is valid with any of these tyrants. And my point is that those who presume to stand up and say, because I have money, that I can decide who lives, who dies, who has children, who does not, they're coming from exactly that same moral place of assuming a godhead and control over the lives of other people.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to try to bring that in.
All right. Well, your point is valid, and I could have gone with Stalin, but I don't know how to describe his mustache. Okay. All right. Well, listen, Laura, we're going to let you go. It's time for us to take another commercial break. And when we come on back, we've got another caller waiting on the line. So stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at my email box, and somebody wrote on in appreciating Francis' call and saying, maybe we need T-shirts that say, no, I do not self-identify as an ATM machine. I could go with that. All right, let's go back to the telephones now. Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
We lost him.
We lost him. Okay, well, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and I could use a few phone calls to finish out the program here. Now, believe it or not, NASA has been receiving a response from the Voyager 1 spacecraft 13 billion miles away after 37 years of inactivity. And basically, they were able to revive Voyager and start to use what were called the backup micro thrusters to get it to align to point the high gain antenna back to Earth. And they basically came up with a solution, and they gave the job of orientation to a set of thrusters that had been asleep for 37 years. And that is amazing. And it does show that if you really want to, you can make something that lasts for 37 years. And now they're saying that they can actually get meaningful data from Voyager for at least another 3 years. Now, the reason that that is important, obviously, it's not going to pass any more planets, but it's out there past what is called the heliopause. It is actually in interstellar space. And it's sending back observations from its instruments, obviously not the cameras, as well as its orbit is being very carefully tracked along with that of Voyager 2 to see if there is any hidden mass out there. And apparently there are some perturbations in their trajectories that suggest something else might be out there. Now, of course, every once in a while we'll have the so-called 10th planet search, or now that Pluto's been demoted, the 9th planet search, because it's been known for a long time that the orbits of the known planets aren't exactly the way they ought to be if there was no other influence out there. And so there's always been talk of a large super Jovian planet out there orbiting our sun. But there might be another possibility. I'm going to engage in a little speculation here. And that has to do with what is called the so-called background radiation from the Big Bang. Now, as you probably know, I do not agree with the theory of the Big Bang. I think it's got all kinds of holes in it. But there was a satellite sent up called COBE, which went on up to measure the cosmic background radiation. And it did find a background radiation there. But whereas the theory of the Big Bang theorized a smooth, featureless glow, COBE found a very convoluted, highly detailed radiation field surrounding us on all sides. And so everybody said, well, that's got to be it. There's no other explanation. But there might be. There might be, and it goes back to the idea that sometimes stars exist in what are called binary pairs. Now, the conventional wisdom is that a close binary will not support solar systems because the gravity of the partner star will pull the planets away from, they'll pull planets away from each other. But if the two binaries are far enough apart, then the perturbations are going to be much, much reduced. So what I theorize may be out there is going to be much larger and much further away than the hypothesized ninth planet. It's the dead core of a once exploded star that used to be a partner with our sun, and it's still there. They're still orbiting each other. And what we are being told is the cosmic background radiation is actually the remains of a very old, distended, diffuse planetary nebula that formed around our twin stars from that explosion, which would also explain why so much of our solar system looks like it's been hit with a shotgun. All right. We still have another minute to go. So great that Voyager is doing this. Boy, does that make me feel old. Because when I was at JPL, I did a little bit of work on Voyager right after I finished up with Viking. And has it really been that long? Oh, my goodness. So anyway, well done, Voyager. And great to see that it's still going on. And sometimes these things really do just do very, very well out there. And they outperform. That's what happened with Viking. They were never expected to last beyond 256 pictures of the surface, and instead got over 4,000. So sometimes you just get lucky. And I do support Trump's desire for a renewed space program, not because I love outer space and space exploration and want to see flags of the United States flying over the planets, but because we need a civilian technology incubator to regain our lead in industry and technology. We're going to take a break for commercials. Please call in and join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are loading up. Let's start with Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, when you were talking about the NSA possibly, and I would tell you likely being involved, at least being involved in cybercrime by non-intervention at the very least. But active intervention is even more likely. But one can also not discount the fact that, the country with the most moral army in the world has just spent about, several $100 million coming up with cyber people to online ghosts and all these people and shills and so on. And they may very well be the people like attacking your server, or of course they can do cybercrime as well. They've got all of our emails, all of our accounts. They've got everything. What better way to shut up BDS than to, do a bunch of cyber crimes against people who believe in BDS? But, they're the only country, of course, the only religion with their own nuclear weapons and their own secret service and several central banks and, what can you say?
Well, getting on back to NSA possibly being the cyber criminals, Kaspersky basically claimed to have identified the hacker collective Equation Group as being part of the NSA. So, yeah, it does look like that's possible, and it may be that NSA justifies it saying, well, we have to be hackers before we can learn how to defend against hackers. That was Israel's rationale for recruiting hackers for their latest effort as well.
I think it's likely, Mike. And by the way, how about a huge no comment on the 1,000 or 1,500 wounded and 18 or whatever dead there are from American media?
Well, Fox News, believe it or not, just ran a story, and they balanced it. They said there are conflicting accounts as to what happened from the Israeli and Palestinian side, and that's a far cry from the New York Slimes, which simply took the Israel position as if we should accept it without question.
Exactly. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate everything you do, man.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Frank in North Carolina. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha. Yes. I just wanted to report quickly on a story that I saw in my local news. Something that happened apparently over the weekend. It was a little march. I have no idea how many people. It might have been as few as 50 or even less, or it could have been more. I don't know. But it was in support of DACA, you know, and
Yes.
It looked like most of the people involved were Hispanic, Latino, whatever. But it happened here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there was some guy who, as they were marching down the sidewalk, I guess, in front of his residence, he opened his door and stood in his doorway. He didn't come out, you know, he didn't approach them or to confront them or anything, but he stood, I guess, quietly in his doorway. And I'm sure you can go on and look this up on the internet. It happened in the Plaza Midwood area of Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's Plaza Midwood, M-I-D-W-O-O-D. It's kind of a mixed area right there. But anyway, he stood in the doorway with, it was a white male, appeared to be completely by himself, had on jeans and some type of a black shirt. His face is blotted out. And he's holding in his hand an AR-15 with collapsible stock, short barrel. He's holding it with one hand sort of away from his body slightly, and I guess the muzzle is pointing straight up. Okay, and he's holding it in one hand, and he's flipping them the middle finger, with the other hand, and they blotted that out too. But I'm assuming that's what it was. But anyway, that was his protest to their march. They called the police and everything, and the reason that I'm calling it in and reporting it is it's pretty remarkable. There was no arrest made. They said since he was not pointing the rifle at anyone, he didn't break any laws, so they basically let him get away with it. I would have thought that they would have come up with some kind of charges, but I just thought your listeners would find that
the letter of the law, he
interesting.
was handling the weapon in a safe manner, although were I in that position, rather than pointing the barrel up, I'd have the barrel pointed down to the ground in case of an accidental discharge. You know the bullet's not going to go anywhere. But yes, he's on his own property. He's inside his own home. He's not presenting a threat. There really isn't a reason for him to be arrested. And as far as DACA is concerned, you're right. These protests are all by the illegal immigrants, and I don't understand why Immigration and Customs Enforcement doesn't go down to all these DACA marches and simply round up these people and check them for their citizenship or residency documents. And it is really out of control. But as of early today, apparently concerned about this caravan of illegal immigrants that are going to try and punch through the border in Texas, Trump has said no deal on DACA. No deal on them as well. If these people are hurt because their parents brought them here illegally, it is the parents' responsibility and not that of the United States government. And I'm sure the liberals are going to be screaming and crying about that one. Reminds me of when Jesse Ventura was in governor, and he basically, there were these young unmarried women with children who were protesting, demanding the state government give them some kind of support so that they could go to school instead of working while they had their children. And Ventura came on out and said, you made choices in your life. Why is this any of the state's business? And of course, the liberals hated him for that one. But this whole nanny state thing has just gone completely overboard. But again, getting on back to that individual, it's not something I would have considered doing. But he is within the letter of the law. As long as the weapon is not pointing at somebody, that would be felony brandishment. But as long as he's handling the weapon in a safe way, he's making a statement. And his being there is, in fact, protected by the First Amendment right to freedom of expression.
I just had an afterthought unrelated to my original report. Just based on what you're saying, you know, in my lifetime, my parents have had to pay for mistakes that I've made, one way or another, you know, and I've had to pay for mistakes that my parents made. Some of them when I was very young and had very little control over my life. I'm not saying anything significant, and I'm not whining or complaining. I mean, I really can't complain too much. But I'm just saying, you know, we all have to pay for mistakes that our parents made, bad decisions, and vice versa. So why is it that some group of people doesn't have to pay for the mistakes their parents made?
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We're at the bread and circuses phase. If you can get a big enough crowd screaming about something, the government will cave on in. Certainly the liberal government will cave on in because they want your votes. And we need more Jesse Venturas out there saying, look, there's a proper role for government, and this is not it. And I'm sorry that these people were brought to the United States illegally by their parents, but that is the parents' responsibility. And it does not give these children a right to be here just because they were children when they came here. They are still illegal immigrants regardless of what age and how they came here. And they should be treated exactly the same as any other illegal immigrant. They should be deported and required to go through the legal immigration process if they really want to live here. All right, back to the phones. John in Austin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael.
Hi.
I heard you mention the pirate radio stations in the UK one day last week, and I tried calling in, but I couldn't get through. And then at the end of the broadcast, I realised that was your sick day off, and it was a repeat. So, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just say a couple of things about that. Is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah, it just when I heard you say that, it just brought a bunch of memories flooding back. The station in question was an outfit called Radio Caroline, and they broadcast off this ship parked out in the North Sea. And as you said, they had to keep moving. Now, we also had another radio station that broadcast out of Luxembourg then, because the BBC, for some reason, just didn't want to play the modern music of the time, and it caused a lot of controversy. And it wasn't until 1967, and I think the Beatles had their first hit record in 1962, and by the time 67 rolled along, we had a lot of the top bands established then, you know, like the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Kinks and what have you. So, and I was sitting here, I just remembered the controversy it caused. A lot of people were very upset about it. And what we had to do, I was working in a factory at the time, and we got to listen to Radio 1 for about 2 hours of the day, and the rest of the day, well, what the BBC did was they created a new formula, actually. They brought out Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 3, and Radio 4. And Radio 1 was the station that played the pop music of the day, and so on. So, yeah, you just brought back those memories, man. It got me quite chuffed.
Well, what it was is that the British government wanted to sort of protect the existing music industry against what they saw were a bunch of kids in garages that were a threat to the profit of the established order. But then after the Beatles came along and all these other British bands, the British government realized, hey, we can make more money with this stuff than the old stuff, and they turned around and embraced it. And of course, Britain's public image today is that they're one of the founding homes of rock and roll.
There you go, yeah. Let me tell you right quick before I go then. Talking about the Palestine issue, there was a small protest in Edinburgh, Scotland on Saturday there, outside the Scottish government offices. Now that's a practice that is allowed without police intervention. as long as there's not a disturbance being caused. And there was only a handful of people there, and the police came along and asked them to move, and of course the people weren't very pleased. And I just sat there watching it, wondering, why is it you can protest anything else at that location, but when it comes to Israel, it's a no-no? That's absolutely disgusting. Anyway, they refused to move.
Yes. Hi,
So
did we...
I thought I'd just share that with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Anything else?
All right. No, that's it, mate. Cheers.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to switch over to Mike in Brazil. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. First, I need to make a comment on. You had an earlier caller by the name of Laura, with several calls ago.
Yes.
And she was concerned as to the reason why no television network like History Channel, Discovery, or National Geographic ever touches the subject of Joseph Stalin having murdered more than 40 million Russians at least. That's a very crude estimate. Well, the reason is very simple why they failed to mention his name. First of all, because Joseph Stalin, as his name implies, actually his name was Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. Okay?
Yes.
That's his name. Stalin was a nickname because he was called the Man of Steel, and he killed anybody. He was a ruthless killer. And first of all, he was Jewish. This is the primary reason why they don't mention his name. The same thing like with Vladimir Lenin. He was Jewish too. The entire Stalin secret police was made up of Jews, all of them. Some people say that was 100%. Some people put the number to 95%. But anyway, the two most feared commissars of Joseph Stalin were Yagoda and Mikhail Kaganovich. They were the two most brutal murderers that Soviet Union has ever seen. So, to make a long story short, the reason none of the networks or newspapers or the media in general mentioned his name, because it's a strong connection between Judaism, although he was an atheist, all of them were. Communism requires you to be an atheist. And basically because they were Jewish and tied to the Jews. Stalin was born in the state of Georgia, in Russia. So he was Jewish. So was. And so the second thing I'm going to comment on is why is it that malware never seems to hit?
Okay, Mike, we seem to have a very bad line here. You're breaking up. Could you maybe talk a little closer to the microphone and see if that makes things better?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry about it. Yeah, we have a bad connection. But no, I hope you got my my comment on Joseph Stalin. Because,
yes.
Well, to repeat, in case that you didn't hear what I said, the guy was born in Georgia. He was a Georgian Jew, and Vladimir Lenin was also Jewish. And in this case, of course, nobody's going to mention their names, and they will try to keep these two figures well undercover because they don't want people to know about them. Because, by the way, somebody once said, I can't remember exactly who was that said this, he said that by the time Hitler had his 1,000 people murdered, Stalin had his 5 million.
Yes.
And not to forget the fact that Stalin was responsible for the famine in Ukraine that killed over 30 million Russians.
Yes.
Brutal famine, like
yes.
nobody has ever seen before. These people were psychopaths, murderers, psychopaths. And Yagoda and Mikhail Kaganovich, they were the executioners. Everybody knew that. Kaganovich ended up being executed himself. He committed a great crime of not obeying his master, and he ended up with a bullet in the back of the head. And the second thing I was going to talk about is the malware. Why is it that this malware never hits government databases like state and federal prisons, local jails, county jails, the FBI, the CIA? How come they seem to be immune to this kind of stuff? Maybe it's because it's them who are doing it?
Yes.
Your comment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's something, completely ridiculous about all these government agencies who are given all this money to basically defend our IT infrastructure, and they're nowhere to be found. Cybercrime is running rampant. It's open season on ordinary American people for their data, their money, their privacy, and it's really no way to live. Anyway, Mike, thank you very much for the information. We're coming up on a commercial break. I'm going to take Tony in Puerto Rico. I may have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Okay. Yeah, you can take me through the commercial break. No problem. I'll wait.
Okay. Well, fine. Then getting on back to the news here. Apparently, there is a new experimental astro litter picker, and it's going to be launched into space next week to try and deal with the 7,600 tons of space junk, one piece of space junk at a time. And apparently, it's a very small spacecraft designed by Surrey University, which can grab space junk, then pull it into Earth's atmosphere where it is burned up, like we saw with the Chinese Tiangong 1 last night. And the little craft is called Remove Debris, and it's going to be on board one of Elon Musk's SpaceX Falcon 9 rockets. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with Tony in Puerto Rico and the end of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment of our program for today on this Monday. And we're going to go back to the phones. Tony in Puerto Rico, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was reading an article in regards to Turkey and Israel that Netanyahu and Erdogan are trading bombs. I mean, I don't want to see any of those countries turn into green glass. I mean, who would win in a war between those two countries? What do you think?
Well, obviously, a full-on war between Israel and Turkey, Israel will win because Israel has nuclear weapons and Turkey does not. But the whole region is just very, very tense, and you're dealing with cultures that have an historical characteristic of not backing down, even when common sense says that they ought to. But everybody is dealing with border incursions. Everybody's thumping their chests. Netanyahu is still trying to find a way to distract everybody from his corruption charges. The whole area is a tinderbox, and it's going to take just one match. And it's all going to be up in flames all the way from Israel itself all the way out to Iran.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of with Israel starting it. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to close the phone lines here and go back and recap some of the stories that we were looking at earlier today. This morning's drop on the stock market, this was the start of the second quarter. And this is the worst second quarter start since the Great Depression of the 1930s. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. I'm sure the plunge protection team is going to be in there trying to get that market back up again. Somebody was certainly doing that toward the end of the day. It was down more than 700, closed down 400. The activity seemed to be nothing but buy. And Malaysia has outlawed fake news with jail terms of up to 6 years. And of course, the government gets to decide what is fake news and what is not. It does feel like dictatorship is just clamping down all over the world. It's almost like the attitude of governments is, we gave you the right to freedom of speech. We didn't think you'd be so impolite as to actually use it. We thought you had more sense than that. Now, over at Remington, they have gone into bankruptcy. And as a result, 2 lawsuits have now been put on hold. One is filed by the families of the Sandy Hook shooting victims, which is a bogus lawsuit. The other one, of course, is a class action lawsuit over that defective trigger design where the guns could accidentally discharge. And yeah, Remington ought to be held to account for that one. But now that they're in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, these cases are both on hold. Automatic stays have been triggered. Meanwhile, as a final reminder of who the aggressor in this world is, the U.S. now has special forces in 149 countries. We only have ambassadors in 144. So that does indicate war over peace. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got stuff I got to do this afternoon. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Talk to people, email people. Stay off that corporate social media. They're filtering everything out there. They don't want the truth to get on out there because they realize the American people are waking up. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.